That black tarp down there on the stoop? Jeremiah asked. I told you, Stanley. It's Stanley's, I told you, Jeremiah, it's Stanley's gag. She's squeeze. Except when she begins purring, he'll be as celebrated as Thomas Edison. Even more famous. You know why? Because how can you ever be more famous than a man who invents something that ain't ever going to die? It's some kind of engine he's working on. A miraculous one, a perpetual motion one. He kicks it off with a block of ice, then it begins to tick, 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 and won't ever stop. Ever, after Papa, Mama, even you and me are long gone. Jeremiah thought a while. Well, that's what I want to be. What? What that Pollock's building. He rolled over and pulled the comforters nearly over his head. Something that ain't ever going to die. Minutes passed, each of us lost in our thoughts. Is that why Jesus wept? He muttered. One of those nights in a deep sleep, I heard a tick-a-tick-a-tick-a-tick so pronounced that it sounded like a steady 8/4 beat on the king drum set. I crawled out of bed and opened the bedroom door expecting to see Jeremiah engrossed in tapping out the time on a snare drum. Tick-a-tick-a-tick-a-tick-a-tick. Except the hallway was empty and dark. Then a muffled swooping sound originated from outside. I ran to the window overlooking Stanley's house. I couldn't see much except the tick-a-tick-a-tick-a-tick-a was clearly emanating from my friend's back stoop, now a steadfast beat, and the whooping seemed to rise from the quarry one-off. Suddenly the phantom appeared, a brief flash of white flesh, the backside of either a woman or a man rising out of the creek with their arms aloft as if in a dance. As this body began to twirl to the tick-a-tick-a-tick-a, on one revolution I would see a woman's contour, only to be replaced by that of a male's on the next. It swirled in a nearly frenzied delight over the Cusack lawn. Stanley and Regina had become one, and the whirling persona was embracing itself in a kind of delirium to the rhythm of the tick-a-tick-a-tick-a-tick-a that now had grown so loud it broadcast through the neighboring yards. My God, I thought, Stanley's machine has come alive. I raised the window. It was a whoosh and splash of something alive. Christ almighty, Edison, you've done it, I cried. You're never going to die. The fucking audacity of it all. Stanley's damned heart. Jerry rigged out of scrap metal and bolts, drummed tick-a-tick-a-tick-a-tick-a, while under the starless sky he whooped and swirled drunk on life. Yet when I awoke to the downpour the next morning, I saw Stanley's curled up on a stoop with the perpetual motion machine stark covering him. It, however, lay apart in pieces. It asked me a couple days earlier if the iceman still delivered to our neighborhood. He was making preparations for his invention's first real test. In the cloak of darkness, had Stanley got it running? Its first tick-a-tick-a-tick-a-tick, but then did it die out? For days the perpetual motion machine lay unassembled on the concrete pad with no sign of Stanley. Normally would see Regina and the children in the backyard, but there was no trace of them either. The Cusack's blind hugged their window sills. 2 entire weeks passed, and not once did I see him reeling from Pisto's tavern, nor his pissing on the house coda. Unable to sleep for worrying about my friend, I slipped down into his yard one evening and covered all the machine parts with a tarp. Already the rides in his children's garden had sprouted rust scales, and I didn't want to spread to Stanley's dream. When I returned to my room, I glanced outside. There in the Cusack bathroom window, the one I'd earlier viewed his and Regina's love dithyramb, Stanley had lifted its blind and stood peering up at me. His expression wasn't stern or even quizzical. Instead, it was void of feeling. I lifted my hand in acknowledgement, but he was looking right through me. It was those black diamond eyes that struck me, as if they could see way up the road to the quarry, even beyond. The shade snapped back in place. By daybreak, the machine was partially assembled once more. I watched him leave for work. And that morning, Regina Cusack went from room to room, lifting the window blinds and letting daylight enter their house once again. It appeared as if nothing had changed from before. Stanley returned to labor on his invention until dark, except he ceased his nightly trek to the tavern. After a couple of days observing him from my room, I ventured down into the yard once again to watch him tinker, standing a foot or two off the cement pad where he worked on his knees. He was engrossed on filing a rod and kept inserting it into a cylinder, making a piston action. Stanley knew I was present, but never looked up. Like, yeah, I see you, but I have to look more precisely at something else. It's just so damn close. You can't see it, Ethan, but I can, except it's god-awful fuzzy. Stanley grasped each piece of the perpetual motion machine which still lay on the concrete in his calloused fingers, stained with years of grime and grit, as if each had a fragile life beating inside it, as if somehow he could fit them all together in this ontological puzzle. Together they would ticka, 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 and then, please God, if they did ticka, 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 maybe with all the will and concentration Stanley Cusack could muster, he'd exhale all the breath that he had left in him on the ticka, 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 please God, it wouldn't stop, then it would ticka, 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 ticka for 30 seconds. Then I would pray for 30 more, then 45, then 60. An insuperable sadness began to well up inside me, for he had begun singing to these parts of metal and sundry nuts and bolts. When I stood up to return to the house, he remained stooped over his unassembled dream, mewling to himself, barely audible, like the sound of bees' wings perhaps, but it was Stanley's raw tongue ticking against his anthracite teeth, accompanying himself to ticka, 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 ticka. 2 nights later, a white towel lay at its knees, and neatly arranged on it were tweezers, cuticle scissors, several nail files, a magnifying glass, a jeweler's brush, and 1 can of sewing machine oil. Only once he glanced up to ascertain I wasn't standing too close, as if somehow my breathing the night air might contaminate his assembly. Of course it wasn't a threatening look. He understood I wanted his perpetual motion machine to fire nearly as much as he did. But I was only a boy. Stanley had no other dreams. It was as he had willed himself into a meticulous artisan of sorts, except his hands were used to grasping acetylene torches, hoisting steel bars and fusing them as one, wielding heavy mallets, clutching pendulous breasts that had nurtured his offspring, threading his name with an uncircumcised cock after yet another night of swilling cheap beer. What could he know of a bee's wings, a virgin's breath, or the ticka, 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 ticka of immortality? Stanley's head lay on the kitchen table, white porcelain top. Iron red blood trickled from his right ear and pooled alongside a half-eaten piece of toast. Regina stood transfixed alongside the Frigidaire, her face cupped into her hands. Moments earlier, she had run screaming up the bank to our back door. I was in the bathroom getting ready for school and burst out of the house with Mama. Stanley was unconscious. Mama tried to rouse him. Stanley, speak to us. What's happening? Do you know what's happening? I thought those questions were strange. The man is dying. Then, for reasons only known to her, Mama began mopping up the blood with paper towels. Call the ambulance, she cried. But Regina stood paralyzed. Ethan, get on the phone. Call the ambulance. Danucci's. Mama began running one hand through his hair while drizzling his face with cold water with the other, all the while insisting, hold on, Stanley. Help is coming. You're going to be fine. Regina and I will see to it. You can hear them, can't you? Help is coming. Regina, you can hear the ambulance, can't you? Regina hears it, Stanley. But nobody could. He's dying. Ma, fucking Stanley. Benjamin Franklin of Hebron is dying. And his perpetual motion machine is lying on the back of the stoop, stone dead. Is this how it all ends? I sat down at the table opposite the one hope that there was something greater in life than the assumed hereafter, with all its heavenly characters in their pastel robes, uttering bromides. Was it the man who pissed against his asphalt setting house, leaving Jeremiah and me? Would we no longer hear him cursing late into darkness as the wrenches and pieces of his internal combustion machine clanked onto the concrete stoop? Sometimes his pain so striking, it would scream through my soul like the Nutsi siren, which I finally heard rounding the corner of the schoolhouse. Leaning close to my friend. Don't die, Stanley. Because if you die, so does our boyhood. I placed my hand on his grease-encrusted one, hoping to feel warmth, some pulsing of blood, that it all wasn't puddling the porcelain top. But his hand felt cold. When I let it go, it clunked onto the metal table like a huge bolt. That night, as Jeremiah took to our fireside of the bed, I prayed that by some miraculous happening, I'd suddenly hear Stanley's Avenger choke to life, even if it was only for a minute. Build a machine that will last forever. Always tinkering late into the night. His was the loneliest pursuit in all the world, I thought. And when late at night he'd wail, "Christ, breathe, can't you just breathe or choke or make one fucking simple noise for me?" It sounded like Christ's lament in Gethsemane. Why hast thou forsaken me? Except Stanley Kuzak's coal black eyes, unlike Christ's delft blue ones, didn't adorn the Bible covers in my house or its pious calendars. Nor was he the voice of my conscience. He was instead the rust of bridges in our town that hung low over polluted streams, the grime of the mill workers up and down our street. He owned the coarse hands that felt like burlap when you shook them. He vented the body odor of folks who had no running water on the outskirts of our town and in the city tenements. His breath had the nose of cheap wine and draft beers. His teeth, those that still remain, were soot chiclets. And when he laughed, it was a pink tongue and purple lips that bared his mirth. But he believed, had a strong faith in his vision, as any character in the Bible. And because his faith was undiminished, implacable, infectious, I prayed for him each night. Because if he lived, so did Jesus. This little light of mine, Stanley's glistened in the morning light on the white porcelain tabletop. Thank you.